Chapter 12. Her departure, at, I should estimate, some 60 mph, left behind it the sort of quivering stillness you get during hurricane time in America, when the howling gale, having shaken you to the back teeth, passes on to tickle up residents in spots further west. Kind of a dazed feeling it gives you. I turned to Jeeves and found him, of course, as serene and unmoved as an oyster on the half-shell. He might have been watching yowling aunts shoot out of rooms like bullets from early boyhood. What was that you said, Jeeves?
Yoicks, sir, if I am not mistaken. It seemed to me that Madam also added tally-ho, gone away, and hard for'ard.
I suppose members of the Corn and the Pitchley are saying that sort of thing all the time.
So I understand, sir. It encourages the hounds to renewed efforts. It must, of course, be trying for the fox.
I'd hate to be a fox, wouldn't you, Jeeves?
Certainly I can imagine more agreeable existences, sir.
Not only being chivied for miles across difficult country, but having to listen to men in top hats uttering those uncouth cries.
Precisely, sir. A very wearing life.
I produced my cambric handkerchief and gave the brow a mop. Recent events had caused me to perspire in the manner popularized by the fountains at Versailles. Warm work, Jeeves.
Yes, sir.
Opens the pores a bit.
Yes, sir.
How quiet everything seems now.
Yes, sir. Silence like a poultice comes to heal the blows of sound.
Shakespeare?
No, sir, the American author Oliver Wendell Holmes. His poem, The Organ Grinders. An aunt of mine used to read it to me as a child.
I didn't know you had any aunts.
3, sir.
Are they as jumpy as the one who's just left us?
No, sir, their outlook on life is uniformly placid.
I'd begun to feel a bit more placid myself. Calmer, if you know what I mean. And with the calm had come more charitable thoughts. Well, I don't blame the aged relative for being jumpy, I said. She's all tied up with an enterprise of pith and something.
Of great pith and moment, sir?
That's right.
Let us hope that its currents will not turn awry and lose the name of action.
Yes, let's. Turn what?
Awry, sir.
Don't you mean agley?
No, sir.
Then it isn't the poet Burns?
No, sir, the words occur in Shakespeare's drama Hamlet.
Oh, I know Hamlet. Aunt Agatha once made me take her son Toss to it at the Old Vic. Not a bad show, I thought, though a bit highbrow. You're sure the poet Burns didn't write it?
Yes, sir. The fact, I understand, is well established.
Then that settles that. But we've wandered from the point, which is that Aunt Dahlia is up to her neck in this enterprise of great pith and moment. It's about Tuppy Glossop.
Indeed, sir.
It ought to interest you, because I know you've always liked Tuppy.
A very pleasant young gentleman, sir.
When he isn't looping back the last ring over the drone's swimming pool, yes. Well, it's too long a story to tell you at the moment, but the gist of it is this. L.P. Runkle, taking advantage of a legal quibble... Is it quibble?
Yes, sir.
Did down Tuppy's father over a business deal. Well, no, not exactly a business deal. Tuppy's father was working for him, and he took advantage of the small print in their contract to rob him of the proceeds of something he had invented.
It is often the way, sir. The financier is apt to prosper at the expense of the inventor.
And Aunt Dahlia is hoping to get him to cough up a bit of cash and slip it to Tuppy.
Actuated by remorse, sir?
Not just by remorse. She's relying more on the fact that for quite a time he has been under the spell of Anatole's cooking, and she feels that this will have made him a softer and kindlier financier, readier to oblige and do the square thing. You look dubious, Jeeves. Don't you think it'll work? She's sure it will.
I wish I could share Madam's confidence, but...
But, like me, you look on her chance of playing on LP Runkle as on a stringed instrument as what? 100 to 8 shot?
A somewhat longer price than that, sir. We have to take into consideration the fact that Mr. Runkle is...
Yes? You hesitate, Jeeves. Mr. Runkle is what?
The expression I am trying to find eludes me, sir. It is one I have sometimes heard you use to indicate a deficiency of sweetness and light in some gentleman of your acquaintance. You have employed it of Mr. Spode, or, as I should say, Lord Sidcup, and in the days before your association with him took on its present cordiality, of Mr. Glossop's uncle, Sir Roderick. It is on the tip of my tongue.
A stinker? No, he said it wasn't a stinker. A tough baby?
No.
A 20-minute egg?
Ah, that was it, sir. Mr. Runkle is a 20-minute egg.
But have you seen enough of him to judge? After all, you've only just met him.
Yes, sir, that is true, but Bingley, on learning that he was a guest of Madam's, told me a number of stories illustrative of his hard-hearted and implacable character. Bingley was at one time in his employment.
Good Lord, he seems to have been employed by everyone.
Yes, sir, he was inclined to flit. He never remained in one post for long.
I don't wonder.
But his relationship with Mr. Runkle was of more extended duration. He accompanied him to the United States of America some years ago, and remained with him for several months.
During which period he found him a 20-minute egg?
Precisely, sir. So I very much fear that Madam's efforts will produce no satisfactory results. Would it be a large sum of money that she is hoping to persuade Mr. Runkle to part with?
Pretty substantial, I gather. You see, what Tuppy's father invented were those magic midget things, and Runkle must have made a packet out of them. I suppose she aims at a 50-50 split.
Then I am forced to the opinion that 100 to 1 against is more the figure a level-headed turf accountant would place upon the likelihood of her achieving her objective.
Not encouraging, you'll agree. In fact, you might describe it as definitely damping. I would have called him a pessimist, only I couldn't think of the word, and while I was trying to hit on something other than gloomy Gus, which would scarcely have been a fitting way to address one of his dignity, Florence came in through the French window, and he, of course, shimmered off. When our conversations are interrupted by the arrival of what you might call the quality, he always disappears like a family spectre vanishing at dawn. Except at meals, I hadn't seen anything of Florence till now, she, so to speak, having taken the high road while I took the low road. What I mean to say is that she was always in Market Snodsbury, bustling about on behalf of the Conservative candidate to whom she was betrothed, while I, after that nerve-wracking encounter with the widow of the late McCorkadale, had given up canvassing in favour of curling up with a good book. I had apologized to Ginger for this. Is pusillanimity the word? And he had taken it extraordinarily well, telling me it was perfectly all right, and he wished he could do the same. She was looking as beautiful as ever, if not more so, and at least 96% of the members of the Drones Club would have asked nothing better than to be closeted with her like this. I, however, would willingly have avoided the tete-a-tete, for my trained senses told me that she was in one of her tempers, and when this happens, the instinct of all but the hardiest is to climb a tree and pull it up after them. The overbearing dishpotness, to which I alluded earlier, and which is so marked a feature of her make-up, was plainly to the fore. She said, speaking abruptly, "What are you doing in here on a lovely day like this, Bertie?" I explained that I had been in conference with Aunt Dahlia, and she riposted that the conference was presumably over by now, Aunt D being conspicuous by her absence, so why wasn't I out getting fresh air and sunshine? "You're much too fond of frowsting indoors. That's why you have that sallow look." I didn't know I had a sallow look. Of course you have a sallow look. What else did you expect? You look like the underside of a dead fish. My worst fears seemed to be confirmed. I had anticipated that she would work off her collar on the first innocent bystander she met, and it was just my luck that this happened to be me. With bowed head, I prepared to face the storm, and then to my surprise, she changed the subject. "I'm looking for Harold," she said. "Oh, yes? Have you seen him?" "I don't think I know him." "Don't be a fool. Harold Winship." "Oh, Ginger," I said, enlightened. "No, he hasn't swum into my ken. What do you want to see him about? Something important?" "It is important to me, and it ought to be to him. Unless he takes himself in hand, he's going to lose this election." "What makes you think that?" "His behaviour at lunch today." "Oh, did he take you to lunch? Where'd you go?" "I had mine at a pub, and the garbage there had to be chewed to be believed. But perhaps you went to a decent hotel." "It was the Chamber of Commerce luncheon at the Town Hall, a vitally important occasion, and he made the feeblest speech I've ever heard. A child with water on the brain could have done better. Even you could have done better." Well, I suppose placing me on a level of efficiency with a water-on-the-brained child was quite a stately compliment coming from Florence. So I didn't go further into the matter, and she carried on, puffs of flame emerging from both nostrils. I beg your pardon?" "He kept saying, I could have thrown a coffee spoon at him." Here, of course, was my chance to work in the old gag about being human, but it didn't seem to me the moment. Instead, I said, "He was probably nervous." "That was his excuse. I told him he had no right to be nervous." "Then you've seen him?" "I saw him. After the lunch. Immediately after the lunch." "But you want to see him again?" "I do." "I'll go and look for him, shall I?" "Yes, and tell him to meet me in Mr. Travers's study. We shall not be interrupted there." "He's probably sitting in the summer house by the lake." "Well, tell him to stop sitting and come to the study," she said, for all the world as if she'd been Arnold Abney, M.A., announcing that he would like to see Wooster after morning prayers. Quite took me back to the old days. To get to the summer house, you have to go across the lawn. The one Spode was toying with the idea of buttering me over. And the first thing I saw as I did so, apart from the birds, bees, butterflies, and what-not, which put in their leisure hours there, was L.P. Runkle lying in the hammock wrapped in slumber, with Aunt Dahlia in a chair at his side. When she sighted me, she rose, headed in my direction, and drew me away a yard or two, at the same time putting a finger to her lips. "He's asleep," she said. A snore from the hammock bore out the truth of this, and I said I could see he was, and what a revolting spectacle he presented, and she told me, for heaven's sake, not to bellow like that. Somewhat piqued at being accused of bellowing by a woman whose lightest whisper was like someone calling the cattle home across the sands of Dee, I said I wasn't bellowing, and she said, "Well, don't! He may be in a nasty mood if he's woken suddenly." It was an astute piece of reasoning, speaking well for her grasp of strategy and tactics. But with my quick intelligence I spotted a flaw in it, to which I proceeded to call her attention. On the other hand, if you don't wake him, how can you plead Tuppy's cause? "I said suddenly, ass! It'll be all right if I let nature take its course." "Yes, you may have a point there. Will nature be long about it, do you think?" "How do I know?" "I was only wondering. You can't sit there the rest of the afternoon." "I can if necessary." "Then I'll leave you to it. I've got to go and look for Ginger. Have you seen him?" "He came by just now with his secretary on his way to the summer house. He told me he had some dictation to do. Why'd you want him?" "I don't particularly. They're always glad of his company. Florence told me to find him. She has been giving him hell, and is anxious to give him some more. Apparently—" Here she interrupted me with a sharp "Hist!" L.P. Runkle had stirred in his sleep, and it looked as if life was returning to the inert frame. But it proved to be a false alarm, and I resumed my remarks. Apparently, he failed to wow the customers at the Chamber of Commerce lunch, where she had been counting on him being a regular... Who was the Greek chap?
Bertie, if I wasn't afraid of waking Runkle, I'd strike you with a blunt instrument. If I had a blunt instrument. What Greek chap?
That's what I'm asking you. He chewed pebbles.
Do you mean Demosthenes?
You may be right. I'll take it up later with Jeeves. Florence was expecting Ginger to be a regular Demosthenes, if that was the name, which seems unlikely. Though I was at school with a fellow called Gianbattista, and he let her down, and this has annoyed her. You know how she speaks her mind when annoyed.
She speaks her mind much too much, said the relative severely. I wonder Ginger stands it.
It so happened that I was in a position to solve the problem that was perplexing her. The facts governing the relationship of guys and dolls had long been an open book to me. I'd given deep thought to the matter, and when I give deep thought to a matter, perplexities are speedily ironed out. He stands it, aged relative, because he loves her, and you wouldn't be far wrong in saying that love conquers all. I know what you mean, of course. It surprises you that a fellow of his thews and sinews should curl up in a ball when she looks squiggle-eyed at him, and receive her strictures, if that's the word I want, with the meekness of a spaniel rebuked for bringing a decaying bone into the drawing-room. What you overlook is the fact that in the matter of finely chiselled profile, willowy figure, and platinum blonde hair, she is well up among the top 10, and these things weigh with a man like Ginger. You and I, regarding Florence coolly, pencil her in as too bossy for human consumption, but he gets a different slant. It's the old business of what Jeeves calls the psychology of the individual. Very possibly the seeds of rebellion start to seethe within him when she speaks her mind, but he catches sight of her sideways or gets a glimpse of her hair, assuming for purposes of argument that she isn't wearing a hat, or notices once again that she has as many curves as a scenic railway, and he feels that it's worth putting up with a spot of mind-speaking in order to make her his own. His love, you see, is not wholly spiritual. There's a bit of the carnal mixed up in it. I would have spoken further, for the subject was one that always calls out the best in me. But at this point the old ancestor, who had been fidgeting for some time, asked me to go and drown myself in the lake. I buzzed off accordingly, and she returned to her chair beside the hammock, brooding over L.P. Runkle like a mother over her sleeping child. I don't suppose she'd observed it, for aunts seldom give much attention to the play of expression on the faces of their nephews, but all through these exchanges I had been looking grave, making it pretty obvious that there was something on my mind. I was thinking of what Jeeves had said about the 100-to-1 which a level-headed bookie would wager against her chance of extracting money from a man so liberally equipped with one-way pockets as L.P. Runkle, and it pained me deeply to picture her dismay and disappointment when, waking from his slumbers, he refused to disgorge. It would be a blow calculated to take all the stuffing out of her, she having been so convinced that she was onto a sure thing. I was also, of course, greatly concerned about Ginger. Having been engaged to Florence myself, I knew what she could do in the way of ticking off the errant mail, and the symptoms seemed to point to the probability that on the present occasion she would eclipse all previous performances. I had not failed to interpret the significance of that dark frown, that bitten lip, and those flashing eyes, nor the way the willowy figure had quivered, indicating, unless she'd caught a chill, that she was as sore as a sunburned neck. I marvelled at the depths to which my old friend must have sunk as an orator in order to get such stark emotions under way, and I intended, delicately of course, to question him about this. I had, however, no opportunity to do so, for, on entering the summer-house, the first thing I saw was him and Magnolia Glendennan locked in an embrace so close that it seemed to me that only powerful machinery could unglue them. Chapter 13. In taking this view, however, I was in error, for scarcely had I uttered the first yip of astonishment when the Glendennan Popsy, echoing it with a yip of her own, such as might have proceeded from a nymph surprised while bathing, disentangled herself and came whizzing past me, disappearing into the great world outside at a speed which put her in the old ancestors' class as a sprinter on the flat. It was as though she had said, "Oh, for the wings of a dove," and had got them. I, meanwhile, stood rooted to the S, the mouth slightly ajar, and the eyes bulging to their fullest extent. What's that word beginning with disembodied? No, not disembodied. Distemper. No, not distemper. Disconcerted, that's the one. I was disconcerted. I should imagine that if you happened to wander by accident into the steam room of a Turkish bath on ladies' night, you would have emotions very similar to those I was experiencing now. Ginger, too, seemed not altogether at his ease. Indeed, I would describe him as definitely taken aback. He breathed heavily, as if suffering from asthma. The eye with which he regarded me contained practically none of the chumminess you would expect to see in the eye of an old friend, and his voice, when he spoke, resembled that of an annoyed cinnamon bear, throaty, if you know what I mean, and on the peevish side. His opening words consisted of a well-phrased critique of my tactlessness in selecting that particular moment for entering the summer house. He wished, he said, that I wouldn't creep about like a ruddy private eye. Had I, he asked, got my magnifying glass with me, and did I propose to go around on all fours, picking up small objects and putting them away carefully in an envelope? What, he inquired, was I doing here anyway? To this I might have replied that I was perfectly entitled at all times to enter a summer house which was the property of my Aunt Dahlia, and so related to me by ties of blood, but something told me that suavity would be the better policy. In rebuttal, therefore, I merely said that I wasn't creeping about like a ruddy private eye, but navigating with a firm and manly stride, and had simply been looking for him because Florence had ordered me to, and I'd learned from a usually well-informed source that this was where he was. My reasoning had the soothing effect I'd hoped for. His manner changed, losing its cinnamon bear quality, and taking on a welcome all-pals-togetherness. It bore out what I've always said, that there's nothing like suavity for pouring oil on the troubled W's. When he spoke again, it was plain that he regarded me as a friend and an ally. "I suppose all this seems a bit odd to you, Bertie?" "Not at all, old man, not at all."
"But there is a simple explanation. I love Magnolia."
"I thought you loved Florence."
"So did I. But you know how apt one is to make mistakes."
"Of course."
"When you're looking for the ideal girl, I mean."
"Quite."
"I dare say you've had the same experience yourself."
"Oh, from time to time."
"Happens to everybody, I expect."
"I shouldn't wonder."
"Where one goes wrong when looking for the ideal girl is in making one's selection before walking the full length of the counter. You meet someone with a perfect profile, platinum blonde hair, and a willowy figure, and you think your search is over. Bingo! You say to yourself, this is the one. Accept no substitutes. Little knowing that you're linking your lot with that of a female sergeant major with strong views on the subject of discipline, and that if you'd only gone a bit further, you would have found the sweetest, kindest, gentlest girl that ever took down outgoing mail in shorthand, who would love you and cherish you, and would never dream of giving you hell, no matter what the circumstances. I allude to Magnolia Glendennan."
"Yeah, I thought you did."
"I can't tell you how I feel about her, Bertie."
"Don't try."
"Ever since we came down here, I've had a lurking suspicion that she was the mate for me, and that in signing on the dotted line with Florence, I'd made the boner of a lifetime. Just now, my last doubts were dispelled."
"What happened just now?"
"She rubbed the back of my neck. My interview with Florence, coming on top of that ghastly Chamber of Commerce lunch, had given me a splitting headache, and she rubbed the back of my neck." Then I knew, as those soft fingers touched my skin like dainty butterflies hovering over a flower.
Right-ho.
It was a revelation, Bertie. I knew that I'd come to journey's end. I said to myself, this is a good thing. Push it along. I turned. I grasped her hand. I gazed into her eyes. She gazed into mine. I told her I loved her. She said so she did me. She fell into my arms. I grabbed her. We stood murmuring endearments, and for a while everything was fine. Couldn't have been better. Then a thought struck me. It was a snag. You've probably spotted it.
Florence?
Exactly. Bossy though she is, plain-spoken though she may be when anything displeases her, and I wish you could have heard her after that Chamber of Commerce lunch. I am still engaged to her, and while girls can break engagements till the cows come home, men can't.
I followed his train of thought. It was evident that he, like me, aimed at being a preux chevalier, and you simply can't be preux or anything like it if you go about the place getting betrothed and then telling the party of the second part it's all off. It seemed to me that the snag which had raised its ugly head was one of formidable, you might say king-size, dimensions, well calculated to make the current of whatever he proposed to do about it turn awry and lose the name of action. But when I put this to him with a sympathetic tremor in my voice, and I'm not sure I didn't clasp his hand, he surprised me by chuckling like a leaky radiator.
"That's all right," he said. "It would, I admit, appear to be a tricky situation, but I can handle it. I'm going to get Florence to break the engagement."
He spoke with such a gay, confident ring in his voice, so like the old ancestor predicting what she was going to do to L.P. Runkle in the playing on a stringed instrument line, that I was loath, if that's the word I want, to say anything to depress him, but the question had to be asked. "How?" I said, asking it.
"Quite simple. We agreed, I think, that she has no use for a loser. I propose to lose this election."
Well, it was a thought, of course, and I was in complete agreement with his supposition that if the McCorkadale nosed ahead of him in the voting, Florence would in all probability hand him the pink slip, but where it seemed to me that the current went awry was that he had no means of knowing that the electorate would put him in second place. Of course, voters are like ants. You never know what they will be up to from one day to the next, but it was a thing you couldn't count on. I mentioned this to him, and he repeated his impersonation of a leaky radiator. "Don't you worry, Bertie. I have the situation well in hand. Something happened in a dark corner of the town hall after lunch that justifies my confidence." "What happened in a dark corner of the town hall after lunch?"
"Well, the first thing that happened after lunch was that Florence got hold of me and became extremely personal. It was then that I realized that it would be the act of a fathead to marry her."
I nodded adhesion to this sentiment. That time when she broke her engagement with me, my spirits had soared, and I had gone about singing like a relieved nightingale. One thing rather puzzled me and seemed to call for explanatory notes. "Why did Florence draw you into a dark corner when planning to become personal?" I asked. "I wouldn't have credited her with so much tact and consideration. As a rule, when she's telling people what she thinks of them, an audience seems to stimulate her. I recall one occasion when she ticked me off in the presence of 17 girl guides, all listening with their ears flapping, and she had never spoken more fluently." He put me straight on the point I'd raised. He said he'd misled me. "It wasn't Florence who drew me into the dark corner, it was Bingley." "Bingley?"
"A fellow who worked for me once."
"He worked for me once."
"Really? It's a small world, isn't it?"
"Pretty small. Did you know he'd come into money?"
"He'll soon be coming into some more."
"But you were saying he drew you into the dark corner. Why did he do that?"
"Because he had a proposition to make to me which demanded privacy. But before going on, I must lay a proper foundation. You know in those Perry Mason stories how, whenever Perry says anything while cross-examining a witness, the district attorney jumps up and yells, 'Objection, Your Honour, the S.O.B. has laid no proper foundation.' Well,
Then you must know that this man Bingley belongs to a butlers and valets club in London called the Junior Ganymede, and one of the rules there is that members have to record the doings of their employers in the club book. I would have told him I knew all too well about that, but he carried on before I could speak. Such a book, as you can imagine, contains a lot of damaging stuff, and he told me he'd been obliged to contribute several pages about me, which, if revealed, would lose me so many votes that the election would be a gift to my opponent. He added that some men in his place would have sold it to the opposition and made a lot of money, but he wouldn't do a thing like that because it would be low, and in the short time we were together he had come to have a great affection for me. I'd never realized before what an extraordinarily good chap he was. I'd always thought him a bit of a squirt. Shows how wrong you can be about people. Again I would have spoken, but he rolled over me like a tidal wave. I should have explained that the committee of the Junior Ganymede, recognizing the importance of this book, had entrusted it to him with instructions to guard it with his life, and his constant fear was that bad men would get wind of this and try to steal it. So, what would remove a great burden from his mind, he said, would be if I took it into my possession. Then I could be sure that its contents wouldn't be used against me. I could return it to him after the election and slip him a few quid if I wished, as a token of my gratitude. You can picture me smiling my subtle smile as he said this. He little knew that my first act would be to send the thing by messenger to the offices of the Market Snodsbury Argus Intelligencer, thereby handing the election on a plate to the McCorkadale, and enabling me to free myself from my honourable obligations to Florence, who would, of course, on reading the stuff, recoil from me in horror. Do you know the Argus Intelligencer? Very far to the left, can't stand Conservatives. It had a cartoon of me last week showing me with my hands dripping with the blood of the martyred proletariat. I don't know where they get these ideas. I've never spilled a drop of anybody's blood except when boxing, and then the other chap was spilling mine. Wholesome give and take. So it wasn't long before Bingley and I had everything all fixed up. He couldn't give me the book then, as he'd left it at home, and he wouldn't come and have a drink with me because he had to hurry back because he thought Jeeves might be calling and he didn't want to miss him. Apparently Jeeves is a pal of his, old club crony, that sort of thing. We're meeting tomorrow. I shall reward him with a purse of gold. He will give me the book, and 5 minutes later, if I can find some brown paper and string, it will be on its way to the Argus Intelligencer. The material should be in print the day after tomorrow. Allow an hour or so for Florence to get hold of a copy, and say 20 minutes for a chat with her after she's read it, and I ought to be a free man well before lunch. About how much gold do you think I should reward Bingley with? Figures were not named, but I thought at least 100 quid, because he certainly deserves something substantial for his scrupulous high-mindedness. As he said, some men in his place would have sold the book to the opposition and cleaned up big. By what I've always thought an odd coincidence, he paused at this point, and asked me why I was looking like something the cat brought in. Precisely as the aged relative had asked me after my interview with Ma McCorkadale. I don't know what cats bring into houses, but one assumes that it is something not very jaunty, and apparently, when in the grip of any strong emotion, I resembled their treasure trove. I could well understand that I was looking like that now. I find it distasteful to have to shatter a long-time buddy's hopes and dreams, and no doubt this shows on the surface. There was no sense in beating about bushes. It was another of those cases of, if it twere done, then twere well it twere done quickly. Ginger, I said, I'm afraid I have a bit of bad news for you. That book is no longer among those present. Jeeves called on Bingley, gave him a Mickey Finn, and got it away from him. He now has it among his archives. He didn't get it at first, and I had to explain. Bingley is not the man of integrity you think him. He is, on the contrary, a louse of the first water. You might describe him as a slimy, slinking slug. He pinched that book from the Junior Ganymede and tried to sell it to the McCorkadale. She sent him away with a flea in his ear because she is a fair fighter, and he tried to sell it to you. But meanwhile Jeeves nipped in and obtained it. It took him perhaps a minute to absorb this, but to my surprise he wasn't a bit upset. Well, that's all right. Jeeves can take it to the Argus Intelligencer. I shook the loaf sadly, for I knew that this time those hopes and dreams of his were really due for a sock in the eye. He wouldn't do it, Ginger. To Jeeves that club book is sacred. I've gone after him a dozen times, urging him to destroy the pages concerning me, but he always remains as uncooperative as Balaam's ass, who, you may remember, dug his feet in and firmly refused to play ball. He'll never let it out of his hands. He took it, as I had foreseen, big. He spluttered a good deal. He also kicked the table, and would have splintered it if it hadn't been made of marble. Must have hurt like sin. But what disturbed him, I deduced, was not so much the pain of a bruised toe as the spiritual anguish. His eyes glittered, his nose wiggled, and if he was not gnashing his teeth, I don't know a gnashed tooth when I hear one. "Oh, won't he?" he said, going back into the old cinnamon bear routine. "He won't he? We'll see about that. Pop off, Bertie. I want to think." I popped off, glad to do so. These displays of naked emotion take it out of one. Chapter 14. The shortest way to the front of the house was across the lawn, but I didn't take it. Instead, I made for the back door. It was imperative, I felt, that I should see Jeeves without delay, and tell him of the passions he had unchained, and warn him to keep out of Ginger's way until the hot blood had had time to cool. I hadn't at all liked the sound of the latter's "we'll see about that," nor the clashing of those gnashed teeth. I didn't, of course, suppose that, however much on the boil, he would inflict personal violence on Jeeves, sock him, if you prefer the expression, but he would certainly say things to him which would wound his feelings, and cause their relations, so pleasant up to now, to deteriorate, and naturally I didn't want that to happen. Jeeves was in a deck chair outside the back door, reading Spinoza with the cat Augustus on his lap. I'd given him the Spinoza at Christmas, and he was constantly immersed in it. I hadn't dipped into it myself, but he tells me it is good, ripe stuff, well worth perusal. He would have risen at my approach, but I begged him to remain seated, for I knew that Augustus, like L.P. Runkle, resented being woken suddenly, and one always wants to consider a cat's feelings. "Jeeves," I said, "a somewhat peculiar situation has popped up out of a trap, and I would be happy to have your comments on it. I'm sorry to butt in when you're absorbed in your Spinoza, and have probably just got to the part where the second corpse is discovered, but what I have to say is of great pith and moment, so listen attentively." "Very good, sir." "The facts are these," I said, and without further preamble, or whatever they call it, I embarked on my narrative. "Such," I concluded some minutes later, "is the position of affairs, and I think you will agree that the problem confronting us presents certain points of interest." "Undeniably, sir." "Somehow Ginger has got to lose the election." "Precisely, sir." "But how?" "It is difficult to say on the spur of the moment, sir. The tide of popular opinion appears to be swaying in Mr. Winship's direction. Lord Sidcup's eloquence is having a marked effect on the electorate, and may well prove the deciding factor. Mr. Seppings, who obliged as an extra waiter at the luncheon, reports that his lordship's address to the members of the Market Snodsbury Chamber of Commerce was sensational in its brilliance. He tells me that, owing entirely to his lordship, the odds to be obtained in the various public houses, which at one time favoured Mrs. McCorkadale at 10-6, have now sunk to evens." "I don't like that, Jeeves." "No, sir. It is ominous." "Of course, if you were to release the club book—" "I fear I cannot do that, sir." "No. I told Ginger you regarded it as a sacred trust. Then nothing can be done except to urge you to get the old brain working." "I will certainly do my utmost, sir." "No doubt something will eventually emerge. Keep eating lots of fish. And meanwhile, stay away from Ginger as much as possible, for he is in ugly mood." "I quite understand, sir. Stockish, hard, and full of rage." "Shakespeare?" "Yes, sir. His Merchant of Venice." I left him then, pleased at having got one right for a change, and headed for the drawing-room, hoping for another quiet go at the Rex Stout, which the swirling rush of events had forced me to abandon. I was, however, too late. The old ancestor was on the chaise longue with it in her grasp, and I knew that I had small chance of wresting it from her. No one who has got his or her hooks on a Rex Stout lightly lets it go. Her presence there surprised me. I had supposed that she was still brooding over the hammock and its contents. "Hello," I said. "Have you finished with your uncle?" She looked up, and I noted a trace of annoyance in her demeanour. I assumed that Nero Wolfe had come down from the orchid room and told Archie Goodwin to phone Saul Panzer and Orry What's-His-Name, and things were starting to warm up. In which event she would naturally resent the intrusion of even a loved nephew whom she had often dandled on her knee. Not recently, but when I was a bit younger.
"Oh, it's you,"
she said, which it was, of course.
"No, I haven't finished with Runkle. I haven't even begun. He's still asleep."
She gave me the impression of being not much in the mood for chit-chat, but one has to say something on these occasions. I brought up a subject which I felt presented certain points of interest. "Have you ever noticed the remarkable resemblance between L.P. Runkle's daily habits and those of the cat Augustus? They seem to spend all their time sleeping. Do you think they've got traumatic symplegia?"
"What on earth's that?"
"I happened to come on it in a medical book I was reading. It's a disease that makes you sleep all the time. Has Runkle shown no signs of waking?"
"Yes, he did. And just as he was beginning to stir, Madeline Bassett came along. She said could she speak to me, so I had to let her. It wasn't easy to follow what she was saying, because she was sobbing all the time, but I got it at last. It was all about the rift with Spode. I told you they'd had a tiff. It turns out to be more serious than that. You remember me telling you he couldn't be a Member of Parliament because he was a peer? Well, he wants to give up his title so that he will be eligible."
"Can a fellow with a title give it up? I thought he was stuck with it."
"He couldn't at one time, at least only by being guilty of treason, but they've changed the rules, and apparently it's quite the posh thing to do nowadays."
"Sounds silly."
"Well, that's the view Madeline takes."
"Did she say what put the idea into Spode's fat head?"
"No, but I can see what did. He's made such a smash hit with his speeches down here that he's saying to himself, 'Why am I sweating like this on behalf of somebody else? Why not go into business for myself?' Who was it said someone was intoxicated with the exuberance of his own verbosity?"
"I don't know."
"Jeeves would. It was Bernard Shaw or Mark Twain or Jack Dempsey or somebody. Anyway, that's Spode. He's all puffed up and feels he needs a wider scope. He sees himself holding the House of Commons spellbound."
Well, why can't he hold the House of Lords spellbound?
"Wouldn't be the same thing. It'd be like playing in the Market Snodsbury tennis tournament instead of electrifying one and all on the centre court at Wimbledon. I can see his point."
"I can't."
"Nor can Madeline. She's all worked up about it, and I can understand how she feels. No joke for a gal who thinks she's going to be Countess of Sidcup to have the fella say, 'April Fool, my little chickadee, what you're going to be is Mrs. Spode.' If I'd been told at Madeline's age that Tom had been made a peer, and I then learned that he was going to back out of it, and I wouldn't be able to call myself Lady Market Snodsbury after all, I'd have kicked like a mule. Titles to a girl are like catnip to a cat."
"Can nothing be done?"
"The best plan would be for you to go to him and tell him how much we all admire him for being Lord Sidcup, and what a pity it would be for him to go back to a ghastly name like Spode."
"What's the next best plan?"
That one's thinking out."
We fell into a thoughtful silence, on my part an uneasy one. I didn't at this juncture fully appreciate the peril that lurked, but anything in the nature of a rift within the lute between Spode and Madeline was always calculated to make me purse the lips to some extent. I was still trying to hit on some plan which would be more to my taste than telling Spode what a pity it would be for him to stop being the Earl of Sidcup and go back to a ghastly name like his, when my reverie was broken by the entry through the French window of the cat Augustus, for once awake and in full possession of his faculties, such as they were. No doubt In a misty, dream-like sort of way, he had seen me when I was talking to Jeeves, and had followed me on my departure, feeling, after those breakfasts of ours together, that association with me was pretty well bound to culminate in kippers. A vain hope, of course. The well-dressed man does not go around with kippered herrings in his pocket. But one of the lessons life teaches us is that cats will be cats. As is my unvarying policy when closeted with one of these fauna, I made chirruping noises and bent down to tickle the back of the dumb chum's left ear. But my heart was not in the tickling. The more I mused on the recent conversation, the less I liked what the aged relative had revealed. Telling Augustus that I would be back with him in a moment, I straightened myself and was about to ask her for further details, when I discovered that she was no longer in my midst. She must suddenly have decided to have another pop at L.P. Runkle, and was presumably even now putting Tuppy's case before him. Well, best of luck to her, of course, and nice to think she had a fine day for it, but I regretted her absence. When your mind is weighed down with matters of great pith and moment, it gives you a sort of sinking feeling to be alone. No doubt the boy who stood on the burning deck whence all but he had fled had this experience. However, I wasn't alone for long. Scarcely had Augustus sprung onto my lap and started catching up with his sleep, when the door opened and Spode came in. I leapt to my feet, causing Augustus to fall to earth I knew not where, as the fellow said. I was a prey to the liveliest apprehensions. My relations with Spode had been for long so consistently strained that I never saw him nowadays without a lurking fear that he was going to sock me in the eye. Obviously I wasn't to be blamed if he and Madeline had been having trouble, but that wouldn't stop him blaming me. It was like the story of the chap who was in prison, and a friend calls and asks him why, and the chap tells him, and the friend says, "But they can't put you in prison for that," and the chap says, "I know they can't, but they have." Spode didn't have to have logical reasons for setting about people he wasn't fond of, and it might be that he was like Florence and would work off his grouch on the first available innocent bystander. Putting it in a nutshell, my frame of mind was approximately that of the fellows in the hymn who got such a start when they looked over their shoulders and saw the troops of Midian prowling and prowling around. It was with profound relief, therefore, that I suddenly got on to it that his demeanour was free from hostility. He was looking like somebody who has just seen the horse on which he had put all his savings, plus whatever he had been able to lift from his employer's till, beaten by a short head. His face, nothing to write home about at the best of times, was drawn and contorted, but with pain rather than the urge to commit mayhem. And while one would always prefer him not to be present, a drawn and contorted with pain Spode was certainly the next best thing. My greeting, in consequence, had the real ring of cordiality in it. "Oh, hello, Spode, hello. There you are. What? Splendid." "Can I have a word with you, Wooster?" Of course. Have several." He did not speak for a minute or so, filling in the time by subjecting me to a close scrutiny. Then he gave a sigh and shook his head. "I can't understand it," he said. "What can't you understand, Spode, old man? Oh, rather, Lord Sidcup, old man," I asked in a kind voice, for I was only too willing to help this new and improved Spode solve any little problem that was puzzling him. "How Madeline can contemplate marrying a man like you. She's broken our engagement and says that's what she's going to do. She was quite definite about it. 'All is over,' she said. 'Here is your ring,' she said. 'I shall marry Bertie Wooster and make him happy,' she said. You can't want it plainer than that." I stiffened from head to F. Even with conditions what they were in this disturbed post-war world, I hadn't been expecting to be turned into a pillar of salt again for some considerable time. But this had done it. I don't know how many of my public have ever been slapped between the eyes with a wet fish, but those who have will appreciate my emotions as the 7th Earl of Sidcup delivered this devastating bulletin. Everything started to go all wobbly, and through what is known as a murky mist I seemed to be watching a quivering at the edges 7th Earl, performing the sort of gyrations travelled friends have told me the Oulad Nail dancers do in Cairo. I was stunned. It seemed to me incredible that Madeline Bassett should have blown the whistle on their engagement. Then I remembered that at the time when she had plighted her troth, Spode was dangling a countess's coronet before her eyes, and the thing became more understandable. I mean, take away the coronet, and what had you got? Just Spode. Not good enough, a girl would naturally feel. He, meanwhile, was going on to explain why he found it so bizarre that Madeline should be contemplating marrying me, and almost immediately I saw that I'd been mistaken in supposing that he was not hostile. He spoke from between clenched teeth, and that always tells the story. As far as I can see, Wooster, you are without attraction of any kind. Intelligence? No. Looks? No. Efficiency? No. You can't even steal an umbrella without getting caught. All that can be said for you is that you don't wear a moustache. They tell me you did grow one once, but mercifully shaved it off. That is to your credit, but it is a small thing to weigh in the balance against all your other defects. When one considers how numerous these are, one can only suppose that it is your shady record of stealing anything you can lay your hands on that appeals to Madeline's romantic soul. She is marrying you in the hope of reforming you, and let me tell you, Wooster, that if you disappoint that hope you will be sorry. She may have rejected me, but I shall always love her, as I have done since she was so high, and I shall do my utmost to see that her gentle heart is not broken by any sneaking son of a whatnot who looks like a chorus boy in a touring revue playing the small towns, and cannot see anything of value without pocketing it. You will probably think you are safe from me when you are doing your stretch in Wormwood Scrubs for larceny, but I shall be waiting for you when you come out, and I shall tear you limb from limb. And, he added, for his was a one-track mind, dance on the fragments in hobnailed boots. He paused, produced his cigarette case, asked me if I had a match, thanked me when I gave him one, and withdrew. He left behind him a Bertram Wooster, whom the dullest eye could have spotted as not being at the peak of his form. The prospect of being linked for life to a girl who would come down to breakfast and put her hands over my eyes and say, "Guess who?" had given my morale a sickening wallop, reducing me to the level of one of those wee, sleekit, timorous, cowering beasties Jeeves tell me the poet Burns used to write about. It is always my policy in times of crisis to try to look on the bright side, but I make one proviso, viz. That there has to be a bright side to look on, and in the present case there wasn't even the sniff of one. As I sat there draining the bitter cup, there were noises off stage, and my meditations were interrupted by the return of the old ancestor. Well, when I say return, she came whizzing in, but didn't stop, just whizzed through, and I saw, for I am pretty quick at noticing things, that she was upset about something. Reasoning closely, I deduced that her interview with L.P. Runkle must have gone awry, or, as I much prefer to put it, agley. And so it proved when she bobbed up again some little time later. Her first observation was that L.P. Runkle was an illegitimate offspring to end all illegitimate offsprings, and I hastened to commiserate with her. I could have done with a bit of commiseration myself, but women and children first is always the Wooster slogan. "No luck," I said. "None. Wouldn't part. Not a penny." "You mentioned that without his cooperation Tuppy and Angela's wedding bells would not ring out." "Of course I did. And he said it was a great mistake for young people to marry before they knew their own minds." "You could have pointed out that Tuppy and Angela had been engaged for 2 years. "I did." "What did he say to that?" "He said not nearly long enough." "So what are you going to do?" "I've done it," said the old ancestor. "I pinched his porringer." Chapter 15. I goggled at her 100% nonplussed. She had spoken with the exuberance of an aunt busily engaged in patting herself between the shoulder blades for having done something particularly clever, but I could make nothing of her statement. This habit of speaking in riddles seemed to be growing on her. "You what?" I said. You pinched his what?" "His porringer I told you about it the day you got here, don't you remember? That silver thing he came to try to sell to Tom." She had refreshed my memory. I recalled the conversation to which she referred. I had asked her why she was entertaining in her home a waste product like L.P. Runkle, and she had said that he'd come hoping to sell Uncle Thomas Silver something for his collection, and she'd got him to stay on in order to soften him up with Anatole's cooking, and put to him, when softened up, her request for cash for Tuppy. When he turned me down just now, it suddenly occurred to me that if I got hold of the thing and told him he wouldn't get it back unless he made a satisfactory settlement, I would have a valuable bargaining point, and we could discuss the matter further at any time that suited him. I was what is it? Forget my own name next. Oh, appalled. That's the word. Though shocked to the core would be about as good. Nothing much in it, really. I hadn't read any of those etiquette books you see all over the place, but I was prepared to bet that the leaders of society who wrote them would raise an eyebrow or two at carryings on of this description. The chapter on hints to hostesses would be bound to have a couple of paragraphs warning them that it wasn't the done thing to invite people to the home and, having got them settled in, to pinch their porringers. But, good Lord, I ejaculated, appalled, or if you prefer it, shocked to the core. Now what? The man is under your roof. Did you expect him to be on it? He has eaten your salt. Very imprudent with blood pressure like his. His doctor probably forbids it. You can't do this. I know I can't, but I have, she said, just like the chap in the story, and I saw it would be fruitless or bootless to go on arguing. It really is, with aunts, if you're their nephew, I mean, because they were at your side all through your formative years and know what an ass you were then, and can't believe that anything that you may say later is worth listening to. I shouldn't be at all surprised if Jeeves's 3 aunts don't shut him up when he starts talking, remembering that at the age of 6 the child, Jeeves, didn't know the difference between the poet Burns and a hole in the ground. Ceasing to expostulate, therefore, if expostulate is the word I want, I went to the bell and pressed it, and when she asked for footnotes throwing a light on why I did this, I told her I proposed to place the matter in the hands of a higher power. I'm ringing for Jeeves. You'll only get Seppings. Seppings will provide Jeeves. And what do you think Jeeves can do? Make you see reason. I doubt it. Well, it's worth a try. Further chit-chat was suspended till Jeeves arrived, and silence fell, except for the ancestor snorting from time to time, and self-breathing more heavily than usual, for I was much stirred. It always stirs a nephew to discover that a loved aunt does not know the difference between right and wrong. There is a difference. At my school, Arnold Abney, M.A., used to rub it into the student body both Sundays and weekdays. But apparently nobody had told the aged relative about it, with the result that she could purloin people's porringers without a yip from her conscience. Shook me a bit, I confess. When Jeeves blew in, it cheered me to see the way his head stuck out at the back, for that's where the brain is. And what was needed here was a man with plenty of the old grey matter, who would put his points so that even a fermenting aunt would have to be guided by him. "Well, here's Jeeves," said the ancestor. "Tell him the facts, and I'll bet he says I've done the only possible thing and can carry on along the lines I sketched out." I might have risked a fiver on this at, say, 12 to 8, but it didn't seem fitting. But telling Jeeves the facts was a good idea, and I did so without delay, being careful to lay a proper foundation. "Jeeves," I said. "Sir?" he responded. "Sorry to interrupt you again. Were you reading Spinoza?" "No, sir. I was writing a letter to my Uncle Charlie." "Charlie Silversmith," I explained, in an aside to the ancestor. "Butler at Deverill Hall, one of the best." "Thank you, sir." "I know few men whom I esteem more highly than your Uncle Charlie. Well, we won't keep you long. It's just that another problem presenting certain points of interest has come up. In a recent conversation I revealed to you the situation relating to Tubby Glossop and L.P. Runkle. You recall?" "Yes, sir. Madam was hoping to extract a certain sum of money from Mr. Runkle on Mr. Glossop's behalf." "Exactly. Well, it didn't come off." "I am sorry to hear that, sir." "But not, I imagine, surprised. If I remember, you considered it 100 to 1 shot."
Approximately that, sir. Runkle being short of bowels of compassion. Precisely, sir. A 20-minute egg.
Here the ancestor repeated her doubts with regard to L.P. Runkle's legitimacy, and would, I think, have developed the theme had I not shushed her down with a raised hand. "She pleaded in vain," I said. "He sent her away with a flea in her ear. I wouldn't be surprised to learn that he laughed her to scorn."
"The super-fatted old son of a bachelor!"
the ancestor interposed, and once more I shushed her down. Well, you know what happens when you do that sort of thing to a woman of spirit. Thoughts of reprisals fill her mind, and so, coming to the nub, she decided to purloin Runkle's porringer. But I mustn't mislead you. She did this not as an act of vengeance, if you know what I mean, but in order to have a bargaining point when she renewed her application. "Brass up," she would have said when once more urging him to scare the moths out of his pocket-book, "or you won't get back your porringer." Do I make myself clear?
Perfectly clear, sir. I find you very lucid.
Now, first it will have to be explained to you what a porringer is, and here I am handicapped by not having the foggiest notion myself, except that it's silver and old, and the sort of thing Uncle Tom has in his collection. Runkle was hoping to sell it to him. Could you supply any details?" I asked the aged relative. She knitted the brows a bit and said she couldn't do much in that direction.
"All I know is that it was made in the time of Charles II by some Dutchman or other."
"Then I think I know the porringer to which you allude, sir," said Jeeves, his face lighting up as much as it ever lights up, he, for reasons of his own, preferring at all times to preserve the impassivity of a waxwork at Madame Tussaud's.
"It was featured in a Sotheby's catalogue at which I happened to be glancing not long ago. Would it," he asked the ancestor, "be a silver gilt porringer on circular moulded foot, the lower part chased with acanthus foliage, with beaded scroll handles, the cover surmounted by a foliage on a rosette of swirling acanthus leaves, the stand of tatsa form on circular detachable feet, with acanthus border joined to a multifoil plate, the palin top with upcurved rim?"
He paused for a reply, but the ancestor did not speak immediately, her aspect that of one who has been run over by a municipal tram. Odd, really, because she must have been listening to that sort of thing from Uncle Tom for years. Finally she mumbled that she wouldn't be surprised, or she wouldn't wonder, or something like that.
"Your guess is as good as mine," she said. "I fancy it must be the same, madam. You mentioned a workman of Dutch origin. Would the name be Hans Conrad Brechtel of The Hague?" "I couldn't tell you, and I wasn't Smith or Jones or Robinson. That's as far as I go. But what's all this in aid of? What does it matter if the stand is of tatsa form, or if the palin top has an upcurved rim?"
"Exactly," I said, thoroughly concurring. "Or if the credit for these tatsa forms and palin tops has to be chalked up to Hans Conrad Brechtel of The Hague. The point, Jeeves, is not what particular porringer the ancestor has pinched, but how far she was justified in pinching any porringer at all, when its owner was a guest of hers. I hold that it was a breach of hospitality, and the thing must be returned. Am I right?"
"Well, sir—" "Go on, Jeeves," said the ancestor. "Say I'm a crook who ought to be drummed out of the Market Snodsbury Ladies' Social and Cultural Garden Club."
"Not at all, madam."
"Then what were you going to say when you hesitated?"
"Merely that, in my opinion, no useful end will be served by retaining the object."
"I don't follow you. How about that bargaining point?"
"It will, I fear, avail you little, madam. As I understand, Mr. Wooster, the sum you are hoping to obtain from Mr. Runkle amounts to a good many £1,000.
50 at least, if not 100.
Then I cannot envisage him complying with your demands. Mr. Runkle is a shrewd financier."
"Born out of wedlock."
"Very possibly you are right, madam. Nevertheless, he is a man well versed in weighing profit and loss."
According to Sotheby's catalogue, the price at which the object was sold at the auction sale was £9,000. He will scarcely disburse 100 or even 50,000 in order to recover it.
Of course he won't, I said, as enchanted with his lucidity as he had been with mine. It was the sort of thing you have to pay top notches at the bar a king's ransom for. He'll simply say, easy come, easy go, and write it off as a business loss, possibly consulting his legal adviser as to whether he can deduct it from his income tax. Thank you, Jeeves. You've straightened everything out in your customary masterly manner. You're a... What were you saying the other day about Daniel somebody?
A Daniel come to judgment, sir.
That was it. You're a Daniel come to judgment.
It is very kind of you to say so, sir.
Not at all. Well-deserved tribute. I shot a glance at the aged relative. It is notoriously difficult to change the trend of an aunt's mind when that mind is made up about this or that, but I could see at a G that Jeeves had done it. I hadn't expected her to look pleased, and she didn't, but it was evident that she had accepted what is sometimes called the inevitable. I would describe her as not having a word to say, had she not at this moment said one, suitable enough for the hunting field, but on the strong side for mixed company. I registered it in my memory as something to say to Spode sometime, always provided it was on the telephone.
"I suppose you're right, Jeeves,"
she said, heavy-hearted, though bearing up stoutly.
"Seemed a good idea at the time, but I agree with you that it isn't as watertight as I thought it. It's so often that way with one's golden dreams, the
best-laid plans of mice and men gang aft agley," I said, helping her out. "See, the poet Burns. I've often wondered why Scotsmen say gang. I asked you once, Jeeves, if you recall, and you said they had not confided in you. You were saying, ancestor?"
"I was about to say,
or for that matter, agley.
I was about to say,
or aft for often."
"I was about to say,"
said the relative, having thrown her Rex stout at me, fortunately with a less accurate aim than the other time,
"that there's nothing to be done but for me to put the thing back in Runkle's room where I took it from."
Whence I took it would have been better, but it was not to comment on her prose style that I interposed. I was thinking that if she was allowed to do the putting back, she might quite possibly change her mind on the way to Runkle's room and decide to stick to the loot after all. Jeeves's arguments had been convincing to the last drop, but you can never be sure that the effect of convincing arguments won't wear off, especially with aunts who don't know the difference between right and wrong. And it might be that she would take the view that if she pocketed the porringer and kept it among her souvenirs, she would at least be saving something from the wreck.
"Always difficult to know what to give Tom for his birthday," she might say to herself. "This'll be just the thing."
"I'll do it," I said, "unless you'd rather, Jeeves."
"No, thank you, sir."
"Only take a minute of your time."
"No, thank you, sir."
"Then you may leave us, Jeeves. Much obliged for your Daniel come to judgmenting."
"A pleasure, sir."
"Give Uncle Charlie my love."
"I will indeed, sir."
As the door closed behind him, I started to make my plans and dispositions, as I believe the word is, and I found the blood relation docile and helpful. Runkle's room, she told me, was the one known as the blue room, and the porringer should be inserted in the left top drawer of the chest of drawers, whence she had removed it. I asked if she was sure he was still in the hammock, and she said he must be, because on her departure he was bound to have gone to sleep again. Taking a line through the Cat Augustus, I found this plausible. With these traumatic symplegia cases, waking is never more than a temporary thing. I have known Augustus to resume his slumbers within 15 seconds of having had his shopping bag containing tins of cat food fall on him. A stifled oath, and he was off to dreamland once more. As I climbed the stairs, I was impressed by the fact that L.P. Runkle had been given the blue room, for in this house it amounted to getting star billing. It was the biggest and most luxurious of the rooms allotted to bachelors. I once suggested to the aged relative that I be put there, but all she said was, "You!" and the conversation turned to other topics. Runkle, having got it in spite of the presence on the premises of a 7th Earl, showed how determined the A.R. had been that no stone should be left unturned, and no avenue unexplored in her efforts to soften him up. And it seemed ironical that all her carefully thought-out plans should have gone agley. Just shows Burns knew what he was talking about. You can generally rely on these poets to hit the mark and entitle themselves to a cigar or coconut, according to choice. The old sweats will remember, though later arrivals will have to be told, that this was not the first time I had gone on a secret mission to the Blue Room. That other visit, the old sweats will recall, had ended in disaster, and not knowing which way to look, for Mrs. Homer Cream, the well-known writer of suspense novels, had found me on the floor with a chain round my neck, and it had not been easy to explain. This was no doubt why on the present occasion I approached the door with emotions somewhat similar to those I had had in the old days when approaching that of Arnold Abney, M.A., at the conclusion of morning prayers. A voice seemed to whisper in my ear that beyond that door there lurked something that wasn't going to do me a bit of good. The voice was perfectly right. It had got its facts correct first shot. What met my eyes as I entered was L.P. Runkle asleep on the bed, and with my customary quickness I divined what must have happened. After being cornered there by the old ancestor, he must have come to the conclusion that a hammock out in the middle of a lawn, with access to it from all directions, was no place for a man who wanted peace and seclusion, and that these were to be obtained only in the bedroom. Thither, accordingly, he had gone, and there he was. Voilà tout, as one might say if one had made a study of the French language. The sight of this sleeping beauty had, of course, given me a nasty start, causing my heart to collide rather violently with my front teeth. But it was only for a moment that I was unequal to what I've heard Jeeves call the intellectual pressure of the situation. It is pretty generally recognized in the circles in which I move that Bertie Wooster, though he may be down, is never out, the betting being odds-on that, given time to collect his thoughts and stop his head spinning, he will rise on stepping stones of his dead self to higher things, as the fellow said, and it was so now. I would have preferred, of course, to operate in a room wholly free from the presence of L.P. Runkle, but I realized that as long as he remained asleep there was nothing to keep me from carrying on. All that was required was that my activities should be conducted in absolute silence. And it was thus that I was conducting them, more like a spectre or wraith than a chartered member of the Drones Club, when the air was rent, as the expression is, by a sharp yowl, such as you hear when a cougar or a snow leopard stubs its toe on a rock. And I became aware that I'd trodden on the cat Augustus, who had continued to follow me, still, I suppose, under the mistaken impression that I had kippered herrings on my person, and might at any moment start loosening up. In normal circumstances, I would have hastened to make my apologies, and to endeavour, by tickling him behind the ear, to apply balm to his wounded feelings. But at this moment L.P. Runkle sat up, said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa," rubbed his eyes, gave me an unpleasant look with them, and asked me what the devil I was doing in his room. It was not an easy question to answer. There had been nothing in our relations since we first swam into each other's ken to make it seem likely that I had come to smooth his pillow, or ask him if he would like a cooling drink, and I did not put forward these explanations. I was thinking how right the ancestor had been in predicting that, if aroused suddenly, he would wake up cross. His whole demeanour was that of a man who didn't much like the human race as a whole, but was particularly allergic to Woosters. Not even Spode could have made his distaste for them plainer. I decided to see what could be done with suavity. It had answered well in the case of Ginger, and there was no saying that it might not help to ease the current situation. "I'm sorry," I said with an enchanting smile. "I'm afraid I woke you." "Yes, you did.
and stop grinning at me like a half-witted ape."
"Right-ho," I said. I removed the enchanting smile. It came off quite easily. "I don't wonder you're annoyed, but I'm more to be pitied than censured. I inadvertently trod on the cat." A look of alarm spread over his face. It had a long way to go, but it spread, all right. "Hat?" he quavered, and I could see that he feared for the well-being of his Panama with the pink ribbon. I lost no time in reassuring him. "Not hat, cat."
"What cat?"
"Oh, haven't you met? Augustus, his name is, though for purposes of conversation this is usually shortened to Gus. He and I have been buddies since he was a kitten. He must have been following me when I came in here." It was an unfortunate way of putting it, for it brought him back to his original theme.
"Why the devil did you come in here?"
A lesser man than Bertie Wooster would have been nonplussed, and I don't mind admitting that I was, too, for about a couple of ticks. But as I stood shuffling the feet and twiddling the fingers, I caught sight of that camera of his standing on an adjacent table, and I got one of those inspirations you get occasionally. Shakespeare and Burns, and even Oliver Wendell Holmes probably used to have them all the time, but self not so often. In fact, this was the first that had come my way for some weeks. Aunt Dahlia sent me to ask you if you would come and take a few photographs of her and the house and all that sort of thing, so that you'll have them to look at in the long winter evenings. You know how long the winter evenings get nowadays. The moment I had said it, I found myself speculating as to whether the inspiration had been as hot as I had supposed. I mean, this man had just had a conference with the old ancestor which, unlike those between ministers of state, had not been conducted in an atmosphere of the utmost cordiality, and he might be thinking it odd that so soon after its conclusion she should be wanting him to take photographs of her. But all was well. No doubt he looked on her request as what is known as an olive branch. Anyway, he was all animation and eagerness to cooperate. "I'll be right down," he said. "Tell her I'll be right down." Having hidden the porringer in my room and locked the door, I went back to the aged relative and found her with Jeeves. She expressed relief at seeing me. "Oh, there you are, my beautiful bounding Bertie. Thank goodness you didn't go to Runkle's room. Jeeves tells me Seppings met Runkle on the stairs, and he asked him to bring him a cup of tea in half an hour. He said he was going to lie down. You might have run right into him." I laughed, one of those hollow, mirthless ones. "Jeeves speaks too late, old ancestor. I did run into him."
"You mean he was there?"
"With his hair in a braid."
"What did you do?"
"I told him you would ask me to ask him to come and take some photographs."
"Quick thinking."
"I always think like lightning."
"And did he swallow it?"
"He appeared to. He said he would be right down."
"Well, I'm damned if I'm going to smile."
Whether I would have pleaded with her to modify this stern resolve and at least show a portion of her front teeth when Runkle pressed the button, I cannot say, for as she spoke my thoughts were diverted. A sudden query presented itself. What, I asked myself, was keeping L.P. Runkle? He had said he would be right down, but quite a time had elapsed, and no sign of him. I was toying with the idea that on a warm afternoon like this a man of his build might have had a fit of some kind, when there came from the stairs the sound of clumping feet, and he was with us. But a very different L.P. Runkle from the man who had told me he would be right down. Then he had been all sunny and beaming, the amateur photographer who was not only going to make a pest of himself by taking photographs, but had actually been asked to make a pest of himself in this manner, which seldom happens to amateur photographers. Now he was cold and hard, like a picnic egg, and he couldn't have looked at me with more loathing if I really had trodden on his Panama hat.
"Mrs. Travers!"
His voice had rung out with the clarion note of a costermonger seeking to draw the attention of the purchasing public to his blood oranges and Brussels sprouts. I saw the ancestor stiffen, and I knew she was about to go into her grande dame act. This relative, though in ordinary cirques so genial and matey, can on occasion turn in a flash into a carbon copy of a duchess of the old school, reducing an underling to a spot of grease. And what is so remarkable is that she doesn't have to use a lorgnette, just does it all with the power of the human eye. I think girls in her day used to learn the trick at their finishing schools.
Will you kindly not bellow at me, Runkle? I am not deaf. What is it?"
The aristocratic ice in her tone sent a cold shiver down my spine, but in L.P. Runkle she had picked a tough customer to try to freeze. He apologized for having bellowed, but briefly and with no real contrition. He then proceeded to deal with her query as to what it was, and with a powerful effort forced himself to speak quite quietly. Not exactly like a cooing pigeon, but quietly.
"I wonder if you remember, Mrs. Travers, a silver porringer I showed you on my arrival here?" "I do." "Very valuable." "So you told me." "I kept it in the top left-hand drawer of the chest of drawers in my bedroom. It did not occur to me that there was any necessity to hide it. I took the honesty of everybody under your roof for granted." "Naturally." "Even when I found that Mr. Wooster was one of my fellow guests, I took no precautions. It was a fatal blunder. He has just stolen it."
I suppose it's pretty much of a strain to keep up that grand dame stuff for any length of time, involving, as it does, rigidity of the facial muscles and the spinal column, for at these words the ancestor called it a day, and reverted to the corn and pitchliness of her youth.
"Don't be a damn fool, Runkle. You're talking rot. Bertie would never dream of doing such a thing, would you, Bertie?"
"Not in a million years."
"The man's an ass."
"One might almost say a silly ass."
"Comes of sleeping all the time."
"I believe that's the trouble."
"Addles the brain."
"Must, I imagine. It's the same thing with Gus the cat. I love Gus like a brother, but after years of non-stop sleep, he's got about as much genuine intelligence as a cabinet minister."
"I hope Runkle hasn't annoyed you with his preposterous allegations."
No, old ancestor, I'm not angry, just terribly, terribly hurt." You'd have thought all this would have rendered Runkle a spent force and a mere shell of his former self, but his eye was not dimmed, nor his natural force abated. Turning to the door, he paused there to add a few words. "I disagree with you, Mrs. Travers, in the view you take of your nephew's honesty. I prefer to be guided by Lord Sidcup, who assures me that Mr. Wooster invariably steals anything that is not firmly fastened to the floor. It was only by the merest chance, Lord Sidcup tells me, that at their first meeting he did not make off with an umbrella belonging to Sir Watkin Bassett, and from there he has, as one might put it, gone from strength to strength. Umbrellas, cow creamers, amber statuettes, cameras, all are grist to his mill. I was unfortunately asleep when he crept into my room, and he had plenty of time before I woke to do what he had come for. It was only some minutes after he had slunk out that it occurred to me to look in the top left-hand drawer of my chest of drawers. My suspicions were confirmed. The drawer was empty. He had got away with the swag. But I'm a man of action. I've sent your butler to the police station to bring a constable to search Wooster's room. I, until he arrives, propose to stand outside it, making sure that he does not go in and tamper with the evidence." Having said which in the most unpleasant of vocal deliveries, L.P. Runkle became conspic by his A, and the ancestor spoke with considerable eloquence on the subject of fat slobs of dubious parentage who had the immortal crust to send her butler on errands. I, too, was exercised by the concluding portion of his remarks. "I don't like that," I said, addressing Jeeves, who during the recent proceedings had been standing in the background, giving a lifelike impersonation of somebody who wasn't there.
"Sir?"
"If the fuzz search my room, I'm sunk."
"Have no anxiety, sir. A police officer is not permitted to enter private property without authority, nor do the regulations allow him to ask the owner of such property for permission to enter."
"You're sure of that?"
"Yes, sir."
Well, that was a crumb of comfort, but it would be deceiving my public if I said that Bertram Wooster was his usual nonchalant self. Too many things had been happening, one on top of the other, for him to be the carefree boulevardier one likes to see. If I hoped to clarify the various situations which were giving me the pip, and erase the dark circles already beginning to form beneath the eyes, it would, I saw, be necessary for me to marshal my thoughts. "Jeeves," I said, leading him from the room, "I must marshal my thoughts."
"Certainly, sir, if you wish."
"And I can't possibly do it here with crises turning handsprings on every side." Can you think of a good excuse for me to pop up to London for the night? A few hours alone in the peaceful surroundings of the apartment are what I need. I must concentrate. Concentrate.
But do you require an excuse, sir?
It's better to have one. Aunt Dahlia is on a sticky wicket, and would be hurt if I deserted her now, unless I had some good reason. I can't let her down.
The sentiment does you credit, sir.
Thank you, Jeeves. Can you think of anything?
You have been summoned for jury duty, sir?
Don't they let you have a longish notice for that?
Yes, sir, but when the post arrived containing the letter from the authorities, I forgot to give it to you and only delivered it a moment ago. Fortunately, it was not too late. Would you be intending to leave immediately?
If not sooner, I'll borrow Ginger's car.
You will miss the debate, sir.
The what?
The debate between Mr. Winship and his opponent. It takes place tomorrow night.
What time?
It is scheduled for 6:45.
Taking how long?
Perhaps an hour.
Then expect me back at about 7:30. The great thing in life, Jeeves, if we wish to be happy and prosperous, is to miss as many political debates as possible. You wouldn't care to come with me, would you?
No, thank you, sir. I am particularly anxious to hear Mr. Winship's speech.
He'll probably only say, I riposted, rather cleverly. Chapter 16. It was with heart definitely bowed down and the circles beneath my eyes darker than ever that I drove back next day in what is known as the quiet evenfall. I remember Jeeves saying something to me once about the heavy and the weary weight of this unintelligible world. Not his own, I gathered, but from the works of somebody called Wordsworth, if I caught the name correctly, and it seemed to me rather a good way of describing the depressed feelings you get when the soup is about to close over you and no life belt in sight. I was conscious of this heavy and weary weight some years ago, that time when my cousins Eustace and Claude, without notifying me, inserted 23 cats in my bedroom, and I had it again in spades at the present juncture. Consider the facts. I had gone up to London to wrestle in solitude with the following problems. A. How am I to get out of marrying Madeline Bassett? B. How am I to restore the porringer to L.P. Runkle before the constabulary come piling on the back of my neck? C. How is the ancestor to extract that money from Runkle? D. How is Ginger to marry Magnolia Glendennan while betrothed to Florence? And I was returning with all four still in statu quo. For a night and day I had been giving them the cream of the Wooster brain, and for all I had accomplished I might have been the aged relative trying to solve the Observer crossword puzzle. Arriving at Journey's End, I steered the car into the drive. About halfway along it there was a tricky right-hand turn, and I had slowed down to negotiate this, when a dim figure appeared before me. A voice said, "Hoy!" and I saw that it was Ginger. He seemed annoyed about something. His "hoy" had a note of reproach in it, as far as it is possible to get the note of reproach into a hoy, and as he drew near and shoved his torso through the window, I received the distinct impression that he was displeased. His opening words confirmed this. "Bertie, you abysmal louse, what's kept you all this time? When I lent you my car, I didn't expect you to come back at 2 o'clock in the morning." "It's only 7:30. He seemed amazed.
"Is that all? I thought it was later. So much has been happening."
"What's been happening?"
"No time to tell you now. I'm in a hurry."
It was at this point that I noticed something in his appearance which I'd overlooked. A trifle, but I am rather observant. "You've got egg in your hair," I said.
"Of course I've got egg in my hair,"
he said, his manner betraying impatience.
"What did you expect me to have in my hair? Chanel No. 5?
"Did somebody throw an egg at you?"
"Everybody threw eggs at everybody. Correction, some of them threw turnips and potatoes."
"You mean the meeting broke up in disorder, as the expression is?"
"I don't suppose any meeting in the history of English politics has ever broken up in more disorder. Eggs flew hither and thither. The air was dark with vegetables of every description. Sidcup got a black eye. Somebody plugged him with a potato."
I found myself of two minds. On the one hand, I felt a pang of regret for having missed what had all the earmarks of having been a political meeting of the most rewarding kind. On the other, it was like rare and refreshing fruit to hear that Spode had got hit in the eye with a potato. I was conscious of an awed respect for the marksman who had accomplished this feat. A potato, being so knobbly in shape, can be aimed accurately only by a master hand. "Tell me more," I said, well pleased. "Tell you more be blowed. I've got to get up to London. We want to be there bright and early tomorrow in order to inspect registrars and choose the best one." This didn't sound like Florence, who, if she ever gets through an engagement without breaking it, is sure to insist on a wedding with bishops, bridesmaids, full choral effects, and a reception afterwards. A sudden thought struck me, and I think I may have gasped. Somebody made a noise like a dying soda-water siphon, and it was presumably me. "When you say we, do you mean you and M. Glendinning?" "Who else?" "But how?" "Never mind how." "But I do mind how. You were problem D on my list, and I want to know how you've been solved. I gather that Florence has remitted your sentence." "She has, in words of unmistakable clarity. Get out of that car." "But why?" "Because if you aren't out of it in 2 seconds, I'm going to pull you out." "I mean, why did she R your S?" "Ask Jeeves," he said, and attaching himself to the collar of my coat, he removed me from the automobile like a stevedore hoisting a sack of grain. He took my place at the wheel and disappeared down the drive to keep his tryst with the little woman, who presumably awaited him at some prearranged spot with the bags and baggage. He left me in a condition which can best be described as befogged, bewildered, mystified, confused, and perplexed. All I had got out of him was, A, that the debate had not been conducted in an atmosphere of the utmost cordiality, B, that at its conclusion Florence had forbidden the banns, and C, that if I wanted further information, Jeeves would supply it. A little more than the charmers got out of the deaf adder, but not much. I felt like a barrister, as it might be Marm a Corkadale, who has been baffled by an unsatisfactory witness. However, he had spoken of Jeeves as a fount of information, so my first move on reaching the drawing-room and finding no one was there was to put forefinger to bell button and push. Seppings answered the summons. He and I have been buddies from boyhood. Mine, of course, not his. And as a rule, when we meet, conversation flows like water, mainly on the subject of the weather and the state of his lumbago. But this was no time for idle chatter. "Seppings," I said, "I want Jeeves. Where is he?" "In the servants' hall, sir, comforting the parlour maid." I took him to allude to the employee whose gong work I had admired on my first evening, and, pressing though my business was, it seemed only humane to offer a word of sympathy for whatever her misfortunes might be. "Had bad news, has she?" "No, sir, she was struck by a turnip." "Where?" "In the lower ribs, sir." "I mean, where did this happen?" "At the town hall, sir, in the later stages of the debate." I drew in the breath sharply. More and more I was beginning to realize that the meeting I had missed had been marked by passions that recalled the worst excesses of the French Revolution. "I myself, sir, narrowly escaped being hit by a tomato. It whizzed past my ear." "You shock me profoundly, Seppings. I don't wonder you're pale and trembling." And indeed he was, like a badly set blancmange. "What caused all this turmoil?" "Mr. Winship's speech, sir." This surprised me. I could readily believe that any speech of Ginger's would be well below the mark set by Demosthenes, if that really was the fellow's name, but surely not so supremely lousy as to start his audience throwing eggs and vegetables. And I was about to institute further inquiries when Seppings sidled to the door, saying that he would inform Mr. Jeeves of my desire to confer with him. And in due season the hour produced the man, as the expression is. "You wish to see me, sir?" he said. "You can put it even stronger, Jeeves. I yearned to see you." "Indeed, sir?" "Just now I met Ginger in the drive." "Yes, sir. He informed me that he was going there to await your return." He tells me he is no longer betrothed to Miss Cray, being now affianced to Miss Glendennan. And when I asked him how this switch had come about, he said the Jew would explain.
I shall be glad to do so, sir. You wish a complete report?
That's right. Omit no detail, however slight. He was silent for a space, marshalling his thoughts, no doubt. Then he got down to it.
The importance attached by the electorate to the debate, he began, was very evident. An audience of considerable size had assembled in the town hall. The mayor and corporation were there, together with the flower of Market Snodsbury's aristocracy, and a rougher element in cloth caps and turtleneck sweaters, who should never have been admitted.
I had to rebuke him at this point. Bit snobbish, that, Jeeves, what? You are a little too inclined to judge people by their clothes. Turtleneck sweaters are royal raiment when they're worn for virtue's sake, and a cloth cap may hide an honest heart. Probably frightfully good chaps, if one got to know them.
I would prefer not to know them, sir. It was they who subsequently threw eggs, potatoes, tomatoes, and turnips.
I had to concede that he had a point there. True, I said. I was forgetting that. All right, Jeeves, carry on.
The proceedings opened with a rendering of the national anthem by the boys and girls of Market Snodsbury Elementary School.
Pretty ghastly, I imagine.
Somewhat revolting, sir.
And then?
The mayor made a short address, introducing the contestants, and Mrs. McCorkadale rose to speak. She was wearing a smart coat in fine quality wrap over a long-sleeved frock of figured maroquin, pleated at the sides, and finished at the neck with—
Skip all that, Jeeves.
I am sorry, sir. I thought you wished every detail, however slight.
Only when they're— what's the word?
Pertinent, sir.
That's right. Take the McCorkadale outer crust as read. How was her speech?
Extremely telling, in spite of a good deal of heckling.
That wouldn't put her off her stroke.
No, sir. She impressed me as being of a singularly forceful character.
Me too.
You have met the lady, sir?
For a few minutes, which, however, were plenty. She spoke at some length.
Yes, sir. If you would care to read her remarks, I took down both speeches in shorthand.
Later on, perhaps.
At any time that suits you, sir.
And how was the applause? Hearty or sporadic?
On one side of the hall, extremely hearty. The rougher element appeared to be composed in almost equal parts of her supporters and those of Mr. Winship. They had been seated at opposite sides of the auditorium, no doubt by design. Her supporters cheered, Mr. Winship's booed.
And when Ginger got up, I suppose her lot booed him.
No doubt they would have done so had it not been for the tone of his address. His appearance was greeted with a certain modicum of hostility, but he had scarcely begun to speak when he was rapturously received.
By the opposition?
Yes, sir.
Strange.
Yes, sir.
Can you elucidate?
Yes, sir. If I might consult my notes for a moment. Ah, yes, Mr. Winship's opening words were, "Ladies and gentlemen, I come before you a changed man." A voice, "That's good news." A second voice, "Shut up, you bleeder." A third voice— I think we might pass lightly over the voices, Jeeves. Very good, sir. Mr. Winship then said, "I should like to begin with a word to the gentleman in the turtleneck sweater in that seat over there, who kept calling my opponent a silly old geezer. If he will kindly step onto this platform, I shall be happy to knock his ugly block off. Mrs. McCorkadale is not a silly old geezer." A voice— excuse me, sir, I was forgetting. "Mrs. McCorkadale is not a silly old geezer," Mr. Winship said, "but a lady of the greatest intelligence and grasp of affairs. I admire her intensely. Listening to her this evening has changed my political views completely. She has converted me to hers, and I propose, when the polls are open, to cast my vote for her. I advise all of you to do the same. Thank you." He then resumed his seat.
Good Lord, Jeeves.
Yes, sir.
He really said that?
Yes, sir.
No wonder his engagement's off.
I must confess it occasioned me no surprise, sir.
I continued, amazed. It seemed rather incredible that Ginger, whose long suit was muscle rather than brain, should have had the ingenuity and know-how to think up such a scheme for freeing himself from Florence's clutches without forfeiting his standing as a fairly preux chevalier. It seemed to reveal him as possessed of snakiness of a high order, and I was just thinking that you can never tell about a fellow's hidden depths when one of those sudden thoughts of mine came popping to the surface. "Was this you, Jeeves?"
"Sir?"
"Did you put Ginger up to doing it?"
"It is conceivable that Mr. Winship may have been influenced by something I said, sir. He was very much exercised with regard to his matrimonial entanglements, and he did me the honour of consulting me. It is quite possible that I may have let fall some careless remark that turned his thoughts in the direction they took."
"In other words, you told him to go to it?"
"Yes, sir."
I was silent for a space. I was thinking how jolly it would be if he could dish up something equally effective with regard to me and M. Bassett. The thought also occurred to me that what had happened, while excellent for Ginger, wasn't so good for his backers and supporters and the Conservative cause in general. I mentioned this. Tough on the fellows who betted on him.
"Into each life some rain must fall, sir."
Though possibly a good thing, a warning to them in future to keep their money in the old oak chest and not risk it on wagers, may prove a turning point in their lives. What really saddens one is the thought that Bingley will now clean up. He'll make a packet.
"He told me this afternoon that he was expecting to do so."
"You mean you've seen him?"
"He came here at about 5 o'clock, sir."
"Stockish, hard, and full of rage, I suppose?"
"On the contrary, sir, extremely friendly. He made no allusion to the past. I gave him a cup of tea, and we chatted for perhaps half an hour."
"Strange."
"Yes, sir. I wondered if he might not have had an ulterior motive in approaching me."
"Such as?"
"I must confess I cannot think of one, unless he entertained some hope of inducing me to part with the club book. But that is hardly likely. Would there be anything further, sir?"
"You want to get back to the stricken parlour-maid?"
"Yes, sir. When you rang, I was about to see what a little weak brandy and water would do."
I sped him on his errand of mercy and sat down to brood. You might have supposed that the singular behaviour of Bingley would have occupied my thoughts. I mean, when you hear that a chap of his well-established crookedness has been acting oddly, your natural impulse is to say, "Aha!" and wonder what his game is. And perhaps for a minute or two I did ponder on this, but I had so many other things to ponder on that Bingley soon got shoved into the discard. If I remember rightly, it was as I mused on problem B, the one about restoring the porringer to L.P. Runkle, and again drew a blank, that my reverie was interrupted by the entrance of the old ancestor. She was wearing the unmistakable look of an aunt who has just been having the time of her life, and this did not surprise me. Hers, since she sold the weekly paper she used to run, the one I did that piece on what the well-dressed man will wear for, has been a quiet sort of existence, pleasant enough but lacking in incident and excitement. A really sensational event such as the egg and vegetable throwing get-together she had just been present at must have bucked her up like a week at the seaside. Her greeting could not have been more cordial. An aunt's love oozed out from every syllable.
"Hello, you revolting object," she said. "So you're back?"
"Just arrived."
"Too bad you had that jury job. You missed a gripping experience."
"So Jeeves was telling me."
"Ginger finally went off his rocker."
With the inside information which had been placed at my disposal, I was able to correct this view. It was no rocker that he went off, aged relative. His actions were motivated by the soundest good sense. He wanted to get Florence out of his hair without actually telling her to look elsewhere for a mate.
"Don't be an ass, he loves her."
"No longer. He's switched to Magnolia Glendennan."
"You mean that secretary of his?"
"That identical secretary."
"How'd you know?"
"He told me so himself."
"Well, I'll be blowed. He finally got fed up with Florence's bossiness, did he?"
"Yes, I think it must have been coming on for some time without him knowing it, subconsciously, as Jeeves would say. Meeting Magnolia brought it to the surface."
Well, she seems a nice girl.
Very nice, according to Ginger.
I must congratulate him.
You'll have to wait a bit. They've gone up to London.
So have Spode and Madeline, and Runkle ought to be leaving soon. It's like one of those great race movements of the Middle Ages I used to read about at school. Well, this is wonderful. Pretty soon it'll be safe for Tom to return to the nest. There's still Florence, of course, but I doubt if she'll be staying on. My cup runneth over, young Bertie. I've missed Tom sorely. Home's not home without him messing about the place. Why are you staring at me like a halibut on a fishmonger's slab?
I had not been aware that I was conveying this resemblance to the fish she mentioned, but my gaze must certainly have been on the intent side, for her opening words had stirred me to my depths. "Did you say—" Yes, I suppose vociferated would be the word, "that Spode and Madeline Bassett had gone to London?"
Left half an hour ago.
Together?
Yes, in his car.
But Spode told me she'd given him the push.
She did, but everything's all right again. He's not going to give up his title and stand for Parliament. Getting hit in the eye with that potato changed his plans completely. It made him feel that if that was the sort of thing you have to go through to get elected to the House of Commons, he preferred to play it safe and stick to the House of Lords. And she, of course, assured that there was going to be no funny business, and that she would become the Countess of Sidcup all right, withdrew her objections to marrying him. Now you're puffing like Tom when he goes upstairs too fast. Why's this?
Actually, I'd breathed deeply, not puffed, and certainly not like Uncle Tom when he goes upstairs too fast. But I suppose to an aunt there isn't much difference between a deep-breathing nephew and a puffing nephew. And anyway, I was in no mood to discuss the point. "You don't know who it was who threw that potato, do you?" I asked.
The one that hit Spode? I don't. Sort of came out of the void. Why?
Because if I knew who it was, I would send camels bearing apes, ivory, and peacocks to his address. He saved me from the fate that is worse than death. I allude to marriage with the Bassett disaster.
Was she going to marry you?
According to Spode. A look almost of awe came into the ancestor's face.
How right you were, she said, when you told me once that you had faith in your star. I've lost count of the number of times you've been definitely headed for the altar with apparently no hope of evading the firing squad, and every time something has happened which enabled you to wriggle out of it. It's uncanny.
She would, I think, have gone deeper into the matter, for already she'd begun to pay a marked tribute to my guardian angel, who, she said, plainly knew his job from soup to nuts. But at this moment Seppings appeared and asked her if she would have a word with Jeeves, and she went out to have it. And I just put my feet up on the chaise longue and was starting to muse ecstatically on the astounding bit of luck which had removed the Bassett menace from my life, when my mood of what the French call bien-être was given the sleeve across the windpipe by the entrance of L.P. Runkle, the mere sight of whom, cirques being what they were, was enough to freeze the blood and make each particular hair stand on end like quills upon the fretful porpentine, as I've heard Jeeves put it. I wasn't glad to see him, but he seemed glad to see me.
Oh, there you are, he said. They told me you had skipped. Very sensible of you to come back. It's never any good going on the run, because the police are sure to get you sooner or later, and it makes it all the worse for you if you've done a bolt.
With cold dignity I said I'd had to go up to London on business. He paid no attention to this. He was scrutinizing me rather in the manner of the halibut on the fishmonger's slab, to which the ancestor has referred in our recent conversation.
The odd thing is, he said, continuing to scan me closely, that you haven't a criminal face. It's a silly, fatuous face, but not criminal. You remind me of one of those fellows who do dances with the soubrette in musical comedy.
Come, come, I said to myself, this is better. Spode had compared me to a member of the ensemble. In the view of L.P. Runkle, I was at any rate one of the principals moving up in the world.
Must be a great help to you in your business. Lulls people into a false security. They think there can't be any danger from someone who looks like you. They're off their guard. And wham! You've got away with their umbrellas and cameras. No doubt you owe all your success to this. But you know the old saying about the pitcher going too often to the well? This time you're for it. This time...
He broke off, not because he had come to an end of his very offensive remarks, but because Florence had joined us, and her appearance immediately claimed his attention. She was far from being dapper. It was plain that she had been in the forefront of the late battle, for whereas Ginger had merely had egg in his hair, she was, as it were, festooned in egg. She had evidently been right in the centre of the barrage. In all political meetings of the stormier kind, these things are largely a matter of luck. A escapes unscathed, B becomes a human omelette. A more tactful man than L.P. Runkle would have affected not to notice this, but I don't suppose it ever occurred to him to affect not to notice things. "Hello," he said. "You've got egg all over you." Florence replied rather acidly that she was aware of this. "Better change your dress." "I intend to. Would you mind, Mr. Runkle, if I had a word with Mr. Wooster alone?" I think Runkle was on the point of saying, "What about?" but on catching her eye he had prudent second thoughts. He lumbered off, and she proceeded to have the word she had mentioned. She kept it crisp. None of the stuff, which was such a feature of Ginger's oratory. Even Demosthenes would have been slower in coming to the nub, though he, of course, would have been handicapped by having to speak in Greek. "I'm glad I found you, Bertie." A civil, "Oh, was all the reply I could think of. "I've been thinking things over, and I've made up my mind. Harold Winship is a mere lout, and I'm having nothing more to do with him. I see now that I made a great mistake when I broke off my engagement to you. You have your faults, but they are easily corrected. I have decided to marry you, and I think we shall be very happy." "But not immediately," said L.P. Runkle, rejoining us. I described him a moment ago as lumbering off, but a man like that never lumbers far if there is a chance of hearing what somebody has to say to somebody else in private. "He'll first have to do a longish stretch in prison." His reappearance had caused Florence to stiffen. She now stiffened further, her aspect similar to that of the old ancestor when about to go into her grande dame act. "Mr. Runkle!" "I'm here." "I thought you'd gone." "I hadn't." "How dare you listen to a private conversation?" "They're the only things worth listening to. I owe much of my large fortune to listening to private conversations." "What is this nonsense about prison?" "Wooster won't find it nonsense. He has sneaked a valuable silver porringer of mine, a thing I paid £9,000 for, and I'm expecting a man any minute now who will produce the evidence necessary to convict. It's an open and shut case." "Is this true, Bertie?" said Florence, with that touch of the prosecuting district attorney I remembered so vividly, and all I could say was, With a guardian angel like mine working overtime, it was enough. She delivered judgment instantaneously. "I shall not marry you," she said, and went off haughtily to de-egg herself. "Very sensible of her," said L.P. Runkle. "The right course to take. A man like you, bound to be always in and out of prison, couldn't possibly be a good husband. How is a wife to make her plans? Dinner parties, holidays, Christmas treats for the children, the 101 things a woman has to think of, when she doesn't know from one day to another whether the head of the house won't be telephoning to say he's been arrested again, and no bail allowed." "Yes?" said Runkle, and I saw that Seppings had appeared in the offing. "A Mr. Bingley has called to see you, sir." "Ah, yes, I was expecting him." He popped off, and scarcely had he ceased to pollute the atmosphere when the old ancestor blew in. She was plainly agitated, the resemblance to a cat on hot bricks being very marked. She panted a good deal, and her face had taken on the rather pretty mauve colour it always does when the soul is not at rest. "Bertie!" she boomed. "When you went away yesterday, did you leave the door of your bedroom unlocked?" "Course I didn't." "Well, Jeeves says it's open now." "It can't be." "It is. He thinks Runkle or some minion of his has skeleton keyed the lock. Don't yell like that, curse you!" I might have retorted by asking her what she expected me to do, when I suddenly saw all. But I was too busy seeing all to be diverted into arguments about my voice production. The awful truth had hit me as squarely between the eyes as if it had been an egg or a turnip, hurled by one of the Market Snodsbury electorate. "Bingley!" I ejaculated. "And don't sing!" I was not singing, I was ejaculating, "Bingley!" Or vociferating Bingley, if you prefer it. You remember Bingley, the fellow who stole the club book, the chap you were going to take by the throat and shake like a rat? Aged relative, we are up against it in no uncertain manner. Bingley is the Runkle minion you alluded to. Jeeves says he dropped into tea this afternoon. What's simpler for him, having had his cuppa, than to nip upstairs and search my room? He used to be Runkle's personal attendant, so Runkle would naturally turn to him when he needed an accomplice. Yes, I don't wonder you're perturbed, I added, for she had set the welkin ringing with one of those pungent monosyllables so often on her lips in the old Corn and Pitchley days. And I'll tell you something else, which will remove your last doubts, if you had any. He's just turned up again, and Runkle has gone out to confer with him. What do you suppose they're conferring about? Give you 3 guesses. The Corn trains its daughters well. So does the Pitchley. She did not swoon, as many an aunt would have done in her place, merely repeated the monosyllable in a slightly lower tone, meditatively, as it were, like some aristocrat of the French Revolution on being informed that the tumbril waited. "This tears it," she said, the very word such an aristocrat would have used, though speaking, of course, in French. "I'll have to confess that I took his foul porringer." No, you mustn't do that." "What else is there for me to do? I can't let you go to chokey." "I don't mind." "I do. I may have my faults." No. Yes, I'm quite aware that there are blemishes in my spiritual make-up which ought to have been corrected in my finishing school. But I draw the line at letting my nephew do a stretch for pinching porringers which I pinched myself. That's final." I saw what she meant, of course. Noblesse oblige and all that, and very creditable too. But I had a powerful argument to put forward, and I lost no time in putting it. But wait, old ancestor, there's another aspect of the matter. If it's, what's the expression, if it's bruited abroad that I'm merely an as pure as the driven snow innocent bystander, my engagement to Florence will be on again. "Your what to who?" It should have been whom, but I let it go. "Are you telling me that you and Florence—" She proposed to me 10 minutes ago, and I had to accept her because one's either preux or one isn't, and then Runkle butted in and pointed out to her the disadvantages of marrying someone who would shortly be sewing mail-bags in Wormwood Scrubs, and she broke it off. The relative seemed stunned, as if she'd come on something abstruse in the Observer crossword puzzle. "What is it about you that fascinates the girls? First Madeline Bassett, now Florence, and dozens of others in the past. You must have a magnetic personality." "That would seem to be the explanation," I agreed. "Anyway, there it is. One whisper that there isn't a stain on my character, and I haven't a hope. The bishop will be notified, the assistant clergy and bridesmaids rounded up, the organist will start practicing the voice that breathed o'er Eden, and the limp figure you see drooping at the altar rails will be Bertram Wilberforce Wooster. I implore you, old blood relation, to be silent and let the law take its course. If it's a choice between serving a life sentence under Florence and sewing a mail-bag or 2, give me the mail-bags every time." She nodded understandingly and said she saw what I meant. "I thought you would." "There is much in what you say." She mused a while. "As a matter of fact, though I doubt if it will get as far as mail-bags, I'm pretty sure what's going to happen. Runkle will offer to drop the whole thing if I let him have Anatole." "Good God!" "You may well say, good God. You know what Anatole means to Tom." She did not need to labour the point. Uncle Tom combines a passionate love of food with a singular difficulty in digesting it, and Anatole is the only chef yet discovered who can fill him up to the plimsoll mark without causing the worst sort of upheaval in his gastric juices. But would Anatole go to Runkle? "He'd go to anyone if the price was right." None of that faithful old retainer stuff?
None. His outlook is entirely practical. That's the French in him.
I wonder you've been able to keep him so long. He must have had other offers.
I've always topped them. If it was simply another case of outbidding the opposition, I wouldn't be worrying.
But when Uncle Tom comes back and finds Anatole conspicuous by his absence, won't the home be a bit in the melting pot?
I don't like to think of it.
But she did think of it. So did I. And we were both thinking of it when our musings were interrupted by the return of L.P. Runkle, who waddled in and fixed us with a bulging eye. I suppose if he had been slenderer, one might have described him as a figure of doom, but even though so badly in need of a reducing diet, he was near enough to being one to make my interior organs do a quick shuffle off to Buffalo, as if some muscular hand had stirred them up with an egg whisk. And when he began to speak, he was certainly impressive. These fellows who have built up large commercial empires are always what I've heard Jeeves call orotund. They get that way from dominating meetings of shareholders. Having started off with, "Oh, there you are, Mrs. Travers," he went into his speech, and it was about as orotund as anything that has ever come my way. It ran, as nearly as I can remember, as follows.
"I was hoping to see you, Mrs. Travers. In a previous conversation you will recall that I stated uncompromisingly that your nephew, Mr. Wooster, had purloined the silver porringer which I brought here to sell to your husband, whose absence I greatly deplore. That this was no mere suspicion has now been fully substantiated. I have a witness who is prepared to testify on oath in court that he found it in the top drawer of the chest of drawers in Mr. Wooster's bedroom, unskilfully concealed behind socks and handkerchiefs." Here, if it had been a shareholders' meeting, he would probably have been reminded of an amusing story, which may be new to some of you present this afternoon. But I suppose in a private conversation he saw no need for it. He continued, still orotund. "The moment I report this to the police and acquaint them with the evidence at my disposal, Wooster's arrest will follow automatically, and a sharp sentence will be the inevitable result." It was an unpleasant way of putting it, but I was compelled to admit that it covered the facts like a bedspread. "Dust off that cell, Wormwood Scrubbs," I was saying to myself. "I shall soon be with you. Such is the position, but I am not a vindictive man. I have no wish, if it can be avoided, to give pain to a hostess who has been to such trouble to make my visit enjoyable." He paused for a moment to lick his lips, and I knew he was tasting again those master dishes of Anatole's. It was on Anatole that he now touched. "While staying here as your guest, I have been greatly impressed by the skill and artistry of your chef. I will agree not to press charges against Mr. Wooster, provided you consent to let this gifted man leave your employment and enter mine." A snort rang through the room, one of the ancestors' finest. You might have almost called it orotund. Following it with the word, "Ha!" she turned to me with a spacious wave of the hand. "Didn't I tell you, Bertie? Wasn't I right? Didn't I say the child of unmarried parents would blackmail me?" A fellow with the excess weight of L.P. Runkle finds it difficult to stiffen all over when offended, but he stiffened as far as he could. It was as if some shareholder at the meeting had said the wrong thing. "Blackmail? That's what I said. It is not blackmail. It is nothing of the sort." "He is quite right, madam," said Jeeves, appearing from nowhere. I swear he hadn't been there half a second before. "Blackmail implies the extortion of money. Mr. Runkle is merely extorting a cook." "Exactly. A purely business transaction," said Runkle, obviously considering him a Daniel come to judgment. "It would be very different," said Jeeves, "were somebody to try to obtain money from him by threatening to reveal that while in America he served a prison sentence for bribing a juror in a case in which he was involved." A cry broke from L.P. Runkle's lips, somewhat similar to the one the cat Gus had uttered when the bag of cat food fell on him. He tottered, and his face would, I think, have turned ashy white if his blood pressure hadn't been the sort that makes it pretty tough going for a face to turn ashy white. The best it could manage was something Florence would have called sallow.
The ancestor, on the other hand, had revived like a floweret beneath the watering can. Not that she looks like a floweret, but you know what I mean.
"What?"
she ejaculated.
"Yes, madam, the details are all in the club book. Bingley recorded them very fully. His views were very far to the left at the time, and I think he derived considerable satisfaction from penning an exposé of a gentleman of Mr. Runkle's wealth. It is also with manifest gusto that he relates how Mr. Runkle, in grave danger of a further prison sentence in connection with a real estate fraud, forfeited the money he had deposited as security for his appearance in court, and disappeared." "Jumped his bail, you mean?" "Precisely, madam. He escaped to Canada in a false beard."
The ancestor drew a deep breath. Her eyes were glowing, more like twin stars than anything. Had not her dancing days been long past, I think she might have gone into a brisk buck and wing. The lower limbs twitched, just as if she were planning to.
"Well," she said, "a nice bit of news that'll be for the fellows who dole out knighthoods. Runkle, they'll say, that old lag. If we made a man like that a knight, we'd never hear the last of it. The boys on the opposition benches would kid the pants off us. We were discussing yesterday, Runkle, that little matter of the money you ought to have given Tuppy Glossop years ago. If you'll step into my boudoir, we will go into it again at our leisure."
Chapter 17. The last chapter. The following day dawned bright and clear. At least I suppose it did, but I wasn't awake at the time. When eventually I came to life, the sun was shining, all nature appeared to be smiling, and Jeeves was bringing in the breakfast tray. Gus, the cat, who had been getting his 8 hours on an adjacent armchair, stirred, opened an eye, and did a sitting high jump onto the bed, eager not to miss anything that was going. "Good morning, Jeeves."
"Good morning, sir."
"Weather looks all right."
"Extremely clement, sir."
"The snails on the wing and the larks on the thorn, or rather the other way round, as I've sometimes heard you say. Are those kippers I smell?"
"Yes, sir."
"Detach a portion for Gus, will you? He will probably like to take it from the soap dish, reserving the saucer for milk."
"Very good, sir."
I sat up and eased the spine into the pillows. I was conscious of a profound peace. "Jeeves," I said, "I am conscious of a profound peace. I wonder if you remember me telling you a few days ago that I was having a sharp attack of euphoria?"
"Yes, sir. I recall your words clearly. You said you were sitting on top of the world with a rainbow round your shoulder."
"Similar conditions prevail this morning. I thought everything went off very well last night, didn't you?"
"Yes, sir."
"Thanks to you."
"It is very kind of you to say so, sir."
"I take it the ancestor came to a satisfactory arrangement with Runkle?"
"Most satisfactory, sir. Madam has just informed me that Mr. Runkle was entirely cooperative."
"So, Tuppy and Angela will be joined in holy wedlock, as the expression is?"
"Almost immediately, I understood from Madam."
"And even now Ginger and M. Glendennan are probably in conference with the registrar of their choice?"
"Yes, sir."
"And Spode has a black eye, which one hopes is painful. In short, on every side one sees happy endings popping up out of traps. A pity that Bingley is flourishing like a green, what is it? But one can't have everything."
"No, sir. Medio de fonte leporum surgit amari aliquid in ipsis floribus angat."
"I don't think I quite followed you there, Jeeves."
"I was quoting from the Roman poet Lucretius, sir. A rough translation would be, 'From the heart of this fountain of delights wells up some bitter taste to choke them even among the flowers.'"
"Who'd you say wrote that?"
"Lucretius, sir, 99 to 55 B.C.
"Gloomy sort of bird."
"His outlook was perhaps somewhat sombre, sir."
"Still, apart from Bingley, one might describe joy as reigning supreme."
"A very colourful phrase, sir."
"Not my own. I read it somewhere. Yes, I think we may say everything's more or less oojar cum spiff. With one exception, Jeeves," I said, a graver note coming into my voice as I gave Gus his second helping of kipper. "There remains A fly in the ointment, a familiar saying meaning, well, I don't quite know what it does mean. It seems to imply a state of affairs at which one is supposed to look askance. But why, I ask myself, shouldn't flies be in ointment? What harm do they do? And who wants ointment anyway? But you get what I'm driving at. The Junior Ganymede Club book is still in existence. That is what tempers my ecstasy with anxiety. We have seen how packed with trinitrotoluol it is, and we know how easily it can fall into the hands of the powers of darkness. Who can say that another Bingley may not come along and snitch it from the secretary's room? I know it is too much to ask you to burn the beastly thing, but couldn't you at least destroy the 18 pages in which I figure?
I have already done so, sir.
What?
Yes, sir.
You wouldn't be far wrong in saying that I was visibly moved, so visibly indeed that Gus the cat, who had gone to sleep on my solar plexus, shot some inches in the air and showed considerable annoyance. "Jeeves!" I started to vociferate, but he cut in first.
In taking this step, sir, I do not feel that I have inflicted any disservice on the Junior Ganymede Club. The club book was never intended to be light and titillating reading for the members. Its function is solely to acquaint those who are contemplating taking new posts with the foibles of prospective employers. This being so, there is no need for the record contained in the 18 pages in which you figure. For I may hope, may I not, sir, that you will allow me to remain permanently in your service?
You may indeed, Jeeves. It often beats me, though, why, with your superlative gifts, you should want to.
There is a tie that binds, sir.
A what that what?
A tie that binds, sir.
Then, heaven bless it, and may it continue to bind indefinitely. Fate's happenstance may oft win more than toil, as the fellow said.
What fellow would that be, sir? Thoreau?
No, me.
Sir?
A little thing of my own. I don't know what it means, but you can take it as coming straight from the heart.
Very good, sir.
Yes, I didn't think it was bad myself, I said. And after a bit more kidding back and forth, he shimmered out, leaving me to grapple with the problem, call it Problem E, of how to get up and have my bath without waking Gus, who had now transferred himself to my Adam's apple. This concludes the reading of Jeeves and the Tie That Binds by PG Wodehouse. This book was read by Frederic Davidson.